What's up, all you beautiful people? Welcome to another video. Today, I want to share with you the unique psychology of the top 1% elite. And if you're watching this, I have a strong suspicion that you are potentially wanting to become the best version of yourself, right? Step into your potential, step into your greatness. So if you want to be in that top 1%, I'm going to share with you 6 unique mindsets you need to start to adopt. Because if you just do what everybody else does, you will get what everybody else has. If you think the same way that the majority do, if you think the way that your family, your friends, the guy down the street, all of them, then you're going to arrive at the same answers as them, and you're going to get the same results. That's no bueno. So we need to cultivate a unique perspective and way of moving through the world. And these are just 6 of those mindsets that I've seen play out time and time again as I observe the behaviors of the most successful people in the world. The first idea is conviction over consensus. The top 1% do not sit around waiting to get confirmation or agreement from the group about what is the correct course of action or an idea worth pursuing. Because most people do not know what a good idea is, right? I think it was David Ogilvy. He said, if you go around any city in the world, you will see no monuments erected to a committee. No committees, but you will see statues erected to great men, to great women who have gone forth and done incredible things, right? Because they had conviction, they had a belief in their insight or an idea and a bias to action to go make that thing a reality rather than sitting around waiting for consensus. Now, the reason that we wait for consensus is because that's typically the safe thing to do. Like the group is the safe decision because what they're doing by and large has worked. It keeps them alive. And from an evolutionary perspective, if you're going away from the group, if you're doing something contrary to what the group thinks is right, then you're exposing yourself to additional existential risk. So it makes sense from a historical perspective to wait for the consensus and to not be the outlier. But in today's modern world, there is no risk to that. Like being ostracized, being kicked out of the tribe, to being different, being wrong or being right. That's where all the risk and the rewards ultimately go to, is the person who is willing to be contrarian and is ultimately proved right. So you have to have conviction over waiting for consensus. Number 2, the top 1% have internal scorecards, not external scorecards. Most people are playing games that the way they keep score is based off of how other people are doing relative to them or relative to what other people think of them. But the top 1%, they don't sit around thinking about what others will think about them. What they're curious about is, what will I think about me? So for them, it's their self-opinion that matters most. And so they create these internal scorecards that only they can see, only they can judge, that dictate whether or not they're living in alignment with their highest values. So instead of just putting points on the board, trying to put more money in the bank or have that fancy car, like the most successful people, the people that we want to emulate, what I would truly consider the 1% elite, they're not playing that game. They're not even bother to keep score of that game because they have such a strong internal scorecard. Number 3 is the top 1%, by and large, have what's called an internal locus of control. Most people, again, the 99%, they have an external locus of control. So what they do is they go through life believing that things are happening to them outside of their control. Big brother, the government, the king, Trump, he is ruining my life, and the weather this week, and living in this state, and the people that I'm surrounded by. It's all their fault. It's all these things that are outside of your control. There's nothing that you could possibly do about that. And a perfect example of this is I was having a conversation with a guy on Twitter the other day, another rock climber. And this other gentleman kind of like saw his way into the replies, and he made a complaint about the fact that he's like, oh, you know, it sounds great for you guys talking about going climbing outside at these crags, right? And he says, well, I would love to do that, but the nearest crag for me is over 2 hours away. And the other gentleman in the conversation goes, dude, I drive over 2 hours every weekend to go climbing outside. He's like, you just got to want it bad enough, right? And I didn't chime into this, but what's interesting is that back in the heyday of my climbing career, when I lived in California, I lived in the Bay Area in Oakland. And I would go every single weekend to the Sierra Mountains, to Tahoe, to Yosemite. I was there every single weekend. And my friend, that is way farther than 2 hours each way. Like, if you want it bad enough, you will make it work. So the idea there was that gentleman had this idea, like the external locus of control. I can't do it because it's too far away. Whereas me and this other guy, who like both were at one point in our careers top level climbers, we both looked at it and like, dude, that's nothing. That's completely within inside your control. And so the people that rise to that top 1%, they have this feeling of I can physically change reality. I have the ability to change reality to however I want it to be, because they believe they have control over their actions and that those actions actually have a meaningful impact in the world at large. So that's the third idea. Number 4, the top 1% seek understanding, not knowledge. So I fall into this trap all the time where I'm consuming and I'm accumulating knowledge. I'm reading books, I'm listening to podcasts. I love it. I love diving into what I would call like my curiosity, where I want to fill up my curiosity tank. But the top 1% understand it's not enough just to go and binge on information and accumulate knowledge and random facts, right? To be able to recite and memorize. What truly matters is the fundamental understanding that you have of that material and how deeply you understand. So it's not about how much, it's about how well. And so instead of trying to cast your net really broad and really wide and trying to learn a little bit about a lot, I want you to try to like narrow your focus and try to learn a lot about a little, and not just accumulating the information, but trying to work back from first principles. If you could rebuild the idea from the building blocks, right? Because I think it was Feynman said that if you can't build the thing, then you don't truly understand the thing. And in my experience, the top 1%, they understand the thing. Number 5, it's all about pattern recognition. So the top 1%, they're not sitting around chasing trends. They're not paying attention and saying like, oh, this is where the thing is moving. What they do is they pattern match. They recognize that history doesn't repeat itself, but it always rhymes. And so they look at what's happening and they can see repeating cycles. And what's interesting about that is that's like fundamentally what it means to be human. Like it's one of the things that differentiates us from animals. Is we can see patterns in things and then extrapolate the cause and effect and the meaning of that. But the problem that a lot of us run into is that our brains are narrative creating machines. And so regardless of whether or not there is a true pattern, we will create a narrative that explains it. And so you need to be really careful when it comes to pattern recognition that you aren't recognizing phantom patterns. The top 1% are really good at recognizing when their own internal biases and their own internal desire for narrative clarity is leading them to create a false positive pattern. So pattern recognition, unfortunately, there is no way of developing that one that I know of beyond just accumulating a lot of patterns and then going through the process of objectively trying to measure how often you were right and how often you were wrong. And so that's where the idea of keeping like a decision journal comes into play. If you're not familiar with that, just search that on the channel. I've done a number of videos talking about that concept, but incredibly important that we take this process, which is largely subjective, making a decision, having judgment, right? And try to make that into an objective process. The decision journal will help you do that. But first, let me talk about the sixth psychological principle that the 1% kind of adhere to, which is they focus more on trajectory over precision. So a lot of times it's good to have a very clear target in your mind about where you're trying to go, because the more clearly that you can see the target, the more likely you are to hit it, right? In your mind's eye, at least. But the problem is if you get so rigid about moving towards that very small point off in the distance, then you can become paralyzed at times because you're afraid of making the wrong decision, the wrong action that would lead you away from that. So and the only thing that guarantees you won't make progress is to stand still and do nothing, right? And so what the top 1% will do is they will focus more on the trajectory. Okay, am I moving in the general direction of the goal? Not necessarily precisely. I don't need to get the crosshairs perfectly lined up on the bullseye before I start moving towards it. I just need to be within a couple degrees of error, and I just need to move fast, because the faster I move towards the target, the bigger it's going to get and the easier it's going to be to hit it later. I don't need to get it dialed in from a mile out. I just need to get closer to it and then I can dial it in. And it's a backwards mindset for a lot of people, but I'm telling you, you need to take action. And before you have that perfect clarity, by the time you have perfect clarity on the target, you've waited too long, and you're, I don't have a good analogy here. I was going to say something about like the earth will have moved and the target won't be there anymore. I don't know. But like just generally what ends up happening is you spend so long trying to get the sights dialed in that by the time you do, like you don't even take action. Like it took you so long, and that feels like a win in and of itself. And I'm just, my experience, the top 1% don't fuck around with that. They know generally where they're going. They move real fucking fast to get close to the target, and then they worry about setting the sights. Because then at that point, you just have to shoot and hit the broadside of a barn. So those are 6 ideas, 6 mindsets that separate the 1% from the 99%. Let me know down in the comments, guys, which one of these hits you the hardest today, which one resonates the most, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.